Good evening. My name is Robyn Grange, and I'm the Director of the Office of Community Engagement here at Argonne. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's Out Loud public lecture series entitled From Algorithms to Answers, Demystifying AI's Impact on Scientific Discovery. Our lecture tonight highlights the transformative role AI plays in various scientific domains, from machine learning algorithms aiding in data analysis to robotics revolutionizing exploration and automation. Our panelists will explore the profound impact of AI on scientific research and innovation. Now, before we begin, I have a few housekeeping notes for our in-person and our at-home audience. For our virtual audience joining via Vimeo, when you joined, your camera and your mic were turned off. If you experience volume issues, please make sure to unmute the audio and use the volume bar. If you are in need of closed captioning, there is a button you can select on the lower right-hand side of your screen. It's not always perfect, especially when some of the scientific terms are used, so please bear with it. And if you're having any trouble, please send an email to outloud@anl.gov and we'll help you to troubleshoot. For our in-person audience, we are recording the event, so by participating, you are consenting to being recorded. Lastly, the recording will be available on Argonne's YouTube channel, typically within about 5 business days. So if you want to take another look, it's going to be available for you to do so. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing our Associate Laboratory Director for Nuclear Technologies and National Security, Kirsten Laurin-Kovitz. Kirsten leads a directorate that supports a secure and resilient society by advancing nuclear energy and delivering innovative science and engineering-based solutions to inform decision-making. We're delighted to have her here to kick us off tonight, and so please join me in welcoming to the stage Associate Laboratory Director Kirsten Laurin-Kovitz.
Thank you very much, Robyn. Welcome, everyone, to our Out Loud public lecture series. I'm Kirsten Laurin-Kovitz, and I have the honor of serving as Associate Lab Director for Nuclear Technologies and National Security here at Argonne. Paul Kearns, Argonne's Laboratory Director, couldn't be with us today, but he sends his best regards and hopes for a very productive and informative evening for us all. It's a pleasure to host today's program, both for those attending in person and those attending virtually. The hybrid format allows us to share our cutting-edge research with a wide audience. I'm sure that all of you have heard of or even tried generative artificial intelligence. Products like ChatGPT, not to mention digital assistants, navigation, and photo apps are already reshaping how we communicate, how we work, and how we live our daily lives. This evolving technology is overcoming design challenges that are common for all new innovations, especially when adoption happens at a rapid pace. As creators improve artificial intelligence and the supervision and direction become clearer, AI will become one of the most important tools in our scientific toolbox. At Argonne, we are using AI differently. We're working within a closed system as opposed to open source models like ChatGPT, where we are leveraging many AI methods to safely automate experiments and drive discovery. We are responsibly applying AI to solve complex scientific and engineering challenges, the benefits of which will reach into all of our lives. Tonight, we will discuss how AI is unlocking new frontiers in technology at an unprecedented speed and scale. We will share how AI is enabling remarkable advancements to solve complex problems. Imagine better predicting the effects of climate change, finding the right materials for efficient battery-powered cars, or pinpointing the causes of Parkinson's, all in a matter of weeks or months instead of years or decades. That was impossible a couple of years ago, but it's now becoming a reality with AI. To achieve these types of advancements and many more, our scientists and engineers are reconceiving how they do their work. With AI, they are expanding into areas that were too large or too complicated with past technology and old research methods. At the same time, they are creating a framework to integrate models with different simulations. This is the future of science. We devise more sophisticated algorithms to answer new questions, and as our tools become more advanced, they lead us to breakthrough discoveries. The science, the techniques, and the tools advance together. Argonne research in AI began in the 1960s with the development of the mathematical foundations for what was then called automated reasoning. This foundational work continues to influence modern AI systems. Since then, we have developed software and data infrastructure for software and AI tools. Ongoing construction projects on Argonne's campus will also be game changers for the use of AI for science. Right now, Argonne is close to completing 2 new powerhouse scientific tools. One is an upgrade to the Advanced Photon Source, or APS as we call it, a world-leading light source. What is essentially a powerful microscope larger than Wrigley Field, the APS will peer deep inside materials and generate enormous amounts of data. The other is an addition to the Argonne Leadership Computing Facility called Aurora, a next-generation supercomputer. Aurora is being built for AI and will process the massive data from APS and other sources. Aurora will provide cutting-edge modeling, simulations, and data science. While it is not yet fully operational, Aurora has already been ranked as the second fastest computer in the world. We can't wait to see what it does when it becomes fully operational and we're finished. No other research laboratory hosts a comparable dynamic duel of technology, each boosting the power of the other. The two will be open to researchers from around the globe. Tonight's lecture will give you a preview of how AI will transform the way we accelerate science and technology that drive U.S. prosperity and security. We have an engaging program for you tonight. Thank you for being here. Now I'm pleased to introduce Ian Foster, Division Director of Data Science and Learning and an Argonne Distinguished Fellow. Ian's research contributions span high-performance computing, distributed systems, and data-driven discovery. He has published hundreds of scientific papers and 8 books on these and other topics. The methods and software developed under his leadership underpin many large national and international cyber infrastructures. Ian is a leading scientist at Argonne, and we are fortunate he is here tonight to help shed light on these fascinating topics. Thank you, Ian, for leading this Out Loud lecture. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. Thanks, Kirsten, for that introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here to speak to you all tonight. So we're here tonight, as was indicated, to talk about AI, artificial intelligence, also about its promise for science and what Argonne is doing to realize that promise. So AI is all over the news, of course, at the moment, but it's worth mentioning it's not an entirely new idea. In fact, it was just almost 70 years ago that the term was coined to refer to very grandly computer systems that perform tasks that would normally require human intelligence. So what sort of tasks? Well, for example, distinguishing between a cat and a dog in a photo. So that's, of course, a trivial task for you or me. A child can do it. It's actually very hard to program a computer to make that distinction. And that's something we might want to do. Say we were building a computerized cat flat for our home that would distinguish between a cat and a dog, so only the cat gets in, no dogs, no raccoons. I remember having a raccoon come into our house, so that was a bit irritating. But anyway, it turns out to be surprisingly hard to program such distinctions into a computer, things that seem easy for a human to do. So you might think, how would you tell a computer to distinguish between a cat and a dog? Well, one approach taken in the first AI-based systems was simply to program rules. So you might say, well, if an animal has pointy ears, it's a cat. If it has floppy ears, it's a dog. If it's got a small nose, it's a cat. If it's got a large nose, it's a dog. And you might program something to recognize those things. But then, would that work? How would that work? What about this? Come on, next slide. This animal, right? It's got pointy ears and a nose, but clearly to us, it's a dog. So these things are quite complicated. It turns out constructing this rule-based approach to AI didn't work as well as people hoped. But then another approach to AI emerged in the 1970s and 80s called machine learning. You've probably heard that phrase. So here the idea is instead of programming rules into a computer, you give it lots of examples that are labeled, in this case, as cat or dog, and the computer does lots of computation to work out what features it should look for, rather than relying on the human to provide them. That worked quite well, and it still continues to work very well, but for a long time it was held back by a few things, a lack of data for learning and a lack of computer power. But more recently, a number of major advances have occurred, and that's why we're really hearing about AI now in a way that we perhaps haven't beforehand. We've got much more data because of incredibly powerful imaging systems, your digital cameras, our advanced photon source, very powerful computers, your phone, our Aurora supercomputer, and then new approaches to machine learning based on something called deep neural networks. So here's a very simple, it's not a very deep neural network, it's a simple picture of one, but a neural network consists of nodes connected by edges. We pass information in on the left, and then the various nodes in the network transform the information as it flows through according to parameters that are built into the network. In this case, dog and cat pictures come in one side, a label comes out the other saying dog or cat. Now, this network only has 30 parameters. It's a very trivial little network. But over the last decade, the size of the networks that we can implement has increased dramatically thanks to incredibly powerful computers as well as new techniques. In 2022, the largest network that had been built had 100 billion parameters, not 30, but 100 billion parameters. The most powerful network available today has 1 trillion parameters. So 1 trillion parameters for which you all have to determine values. But once you've determined them by this learning process, you can then feed all sorts of interesting things in at one side and get interesting things out the other. You can see now why we need supercomputers for AI, because without a supercomputer, you can't manipulate these trillions of parameters that allow your networks to do interesting things. Now, with networks of this size, we're not talking about recognizing cats and dogs. We're talking about many much more interesting things, like, for example, the ChatGPT conversational agent that was mentioned earlier, and other more interesting applications that I'll talk about in a second. So this is what we might call the AI revolution, which has suddenly appeared after actually decades of preparatory work. So as scientists, we and our colleagues are excited about AI. Well, we sort of like ChatGPT, but that doesn't get us too excited. We're excited about AI because we believe it can accelerate progress and deliver greater scientific understanding on hard problems facing humanity. So what sorts of problems? Well, we're a Department of Energy lab, and the DOE, Department of Energy, which funds Argonne, is interested really in 3 main classes of problems. So obtaining new knowledge about the physical world, delivering reliable, low-cost, and environmentally friendly energy, and ensuring the security of the nation. So, and in each of those areas, scientists have been working actually for decades and obtaining remarkable advances. But arguably, we could say we've solved the easy problems. The problems that remain are getting harder and harder to solve. And so AI, we believe, is the key to continued progress. It's going to allow us to tackle problems that we couldn't previously tackle, even with the smartest people on the planet working on them. So where do we see particular areas of opportunity for AI? So scientists within DOE over the last 3 or 4 years have been thinking about that question deeply, and we've identified 6 broad areas of opportunity, which are listed on the slide that we show here. I'm not going to go into each of those in detail, but leave them for you to contemplate. We're going to talk about 3 of them in some detail tonight. Foundation models, bottom right, material design, upper left, and robotics in the middle. And so we'll go into each of those in some detail in a second, thanks to my expert and panelists who will join us in a minute. But before I go into that, I'd like to just explain why it is that Argonne is addressing these things. So we've certainly got hard problems to tackle, but why do we think we're able to make a difference in this so important area of AI? Well, there's really 3 reasons. Well, first of all, we have, as Kirsten already noted, our immensely powerful supercomputer. The Aurora system, the fastest computer in the world, officially 2nd fastest, but in a couple of weeks it'll get the nod as the fastest, is going to allow us to tackle AI problems that no one else can tackle. So that's an immense advantage. Secondly, I noted that AI is powered by data. So we have more data, more scientific data than in various areas than in any other group, thanks to facilities such as the Advanced Photon Source. And thirdly, we've got this amazing group of talented people working here. We've got scientists, engineers, facility operators, many other people, a unique set of abilities to tackle these problems, both working within the lab and in collaboration with industry, academia, and government. So this unique resources, unique data, unique people, we're working in conjunction with DOE, other policymakers, and with industry and academia, with the goal of leveraging AI for transformative innovations and for, we hope, pivotal discoveries for the nation. Now, I've already spoken enough here. I now want to bring up our 3 panelists to speak about our scientific work. So I'm going to introduce them one by one. Please hold your applause until the end. So Arvind Ramanathan, first of all, he's a computational biologist who's going to talk about the use of a particular class of AI model called a large language model. Second, Matthew Cherukara, he's a computational scientist who's going to speak about machine learning applied to scientific problems. And last but not least, Casey Stone, a computational scientist who's going to talk about her work using robotics and AI to make AI concrete. So please join me in welcoming Arvind, Matthew, and Casey. Okay, so thank you for joining us tonight. Arvind, I'd like to start with a question for you. Sure. So as I've been explaining, the explosion of these so-called large language models, things like ChatGPT, have made the use of AI suddenly very accessible to the general public. Probably many of you have tried to use them to tell stories, write poems, that's my favorite thing, create near lifelike photographs, or to translate languages. However, science, of course, poses unique challenges. So help us understand how large language models are advancing science. And I will leave you here.
Thank you so much, Ian. First, I think you've heard a lot from Ian about what a neural network does and so on, but let's understand what a large language model is all about. So the easiest way to think about it is like, when I am speaking to you, there is a way in which you comprehend the meaning. That is one aspect. But you're also predicting what the next word I might be uttering. Right? So a large language model is a system that sort of takes a lot of data, lots and lots of data, and basically trains on them in order to figure out what that next set of tokens might look like, what the next set of words might look like. So in the natural world, in the natural text world, this is actually easy. Or if you think of an image, it's actually easier in the sense that when you see an image, you sort of understand what that figure might be. So for example, if I were to close my left eye or right eye and think of an image, I can actually complete pretty much, based on a partial image, how the other side of the image should look like. In a similar way, you can also think of having a sentence, and you know what words should flow off next of each other and so on. So when I say a red fox jumps over a fence, you already understand what set of words are coming next based on my context and based on what I'm telling you. So this is exactly what a large language model does, except that this is done automatically by the computer based on predictions that it is capable of making by learning all the correlations that exist in that corpus of data, right? So it is really capable of extracting these complex statistical patterns that are present in the data. And as a consequence, we are able to understand what a large language model can answer questions related to the system. Next slide, please. So let's bring it down to this world where we are trying to understand something scientific. The first form of language is actually genomics in this case. And when the COVID pandemic struck us, I think everybody has been affected by this, and everybody can relate to this. The virus undergoes several changes, even inside a single host or single person. And those mutations actually acquire over time, and somebody has to sift through this data, monstrous amounts of data, to try and figure out if this is a variant that I should be worried about. Is this the next variant that's going to cause the Delta variant that basically destroyed humanity? Or should I wait for the development of a new vaccine strain and so on? So this is a very hard problem to do. And this is one of the language models that we decided to build as a snippet of what a large language model could do for science. Next slide, please. So we built these large language models by taking into account a lot of data that came about from all the prokaryotic genes that we have access to, which is a fairly large set, which is about 110 million genes that we had access to. And we said, can we learn anything about the organization of the genes themselves? Some of the interesting things that came about from this analysis was the fact that these models could actually distinguish what genes were, from a specific species to signatures of where the genes might be, and including protein structures that we probably hadn't paid much attention to in terms of what their function might have been. So it actually simplified a lot of things that these models could actually learn from the data. But when we started applying this on SARS-CoV-2, we really challenged the model. So we said, we are only going to present to you 1 year's worth of data, meaning that it has only seen alpha and beta. And we challenged the model in terms of coming up with ways to predict what the rest of the strains might look like. So as you can see in this picture, there's every dot here which represents a single gene from the prokaryotes. And it learns certain features that include the sequence length, or it includes certain aspects of what it constitutes for codons, which constitute alphabet of life. And then it can also sort of pick up on the adaptability of these genes across different environments. So this is very significant from the point of view of training a model, because it is telling you something about the evolutionary aspects of what the biology is teaching us. And this sort of relates back to function, this sort of relates back to what the proteins can do and how they might be distinguished in a specific environment where the bacteria might be growing or a virus might be growing and so on. And this sort of helps us understand a lot of things about how we might want to design drugs for them, we might want to do vaccines for them. Next. And when we applied this on the SARS-CoV-2 data, one of the things that we also saw was that when we just train it on the first 2 years worth of data, we can actually see it can spread out all the different species correctly, or the different strains correctly. And it also tells us where these geographic origins of the strains were. The fact that we didn't give anything other than the raw nucleotide data or the raw genomic data as context, and the fact that it's able to pick up all these different variants correctly is kind of cool, because no other model could actually do this very accurately. And the fact that we could come up with these strains even before they're identified as being strains of concern or variants of concern was one of the key things that we found from our studies. Now, how are we using these large language models downstream? We actually have a project where we are thinking of designing vaccines for what is called as disease X, which means that we might not know where this virus might come from or what the next pandemic might look like, but we want to be able to have these reserve libraries that we can go after and then design certain aspects of what a vaccine might look like, targeting them. So you can actually like accelerate the discovery for these things. And in a later talk with Casey, you're going to see how this is impacting like real-world applications for antimicrobial discovery and things like that. But the whole story is that we are able to design these new elements which we hadn't really envisaged before, which is not possible with traditional approaches thus far. Right? Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Arvind. So these large language models, as we've just heard, are really at the cutting edge of new approaches where innovation is happening. But there's actually, at this point, we have decades of experience with the use of other sorts of machine learning models and methods for analyzing scientific data. So Matthew, I'd like to turn to you now and ask, could you tell us a bit about how machine learning has already revolutionized the analysis of scientific data?
Sure. Thank you. So at a high level, AI is helping researchers process and analyze data thousands of times faster than they could before. And this new speed up is a total game changer. It's leading to new insights and new discoveries that were previously thought impossible or just too time consuming. So let me start by showing you a little bit about where I work. So I work at this very large, incredibly complex machine called the Advanced Photon Source that you see in the drone footage here. And I'm told it's so big that you can fit all of Wrigley Field inside it. And this giant machine is a source of extremely bright, extremely focused X-rays, billions of times brighter than what you would receive in a doctor's office. And scientists from all over the world come use this machine to look deep into the heart of materials. At any given point of time, you have about 70-odd experiments that run in parallel, some with manual human intervention, like this person is, and often with automated sample handling as well. These experiments touch upon every aspect of our everyday lives, from faster charging, longer-lasting batteries, to cheaper, more efficient solar cells, to the next generation of microelectronics that power our devices. And all of these experiments running in parallel generate a lot of data. So if we were to store all the data that we generate from the experiments on DVDs, we would generate tens of millions of DVDs every year, or tens of DVDs every minute, right? So just way too much for humans to process. AI lets us process all of this data in real time as it is being generated by the experiment, and even lets us the AI makes adjustments to the experiment if it spots something interesting in the data. So let's take the microelectronics example. 60 years ago, even the smallest computers took up a lot of space. But they've shrunk from these giant, clunky machines to something you can hold in your hand and play really graphics-intensive games. And this has been driven by the shrinking of the electronics in these devices, right? So today, a transistor in a chip is in the order of a few tens of nanometers or so. For context, a sheet of paper is about 100,000 nanometers thick, so really, really tiny devices. And so if you want to spot and study any of the manufacturing defects that might pop up in these complex 3D structures, you need a tool as unique as the APS. So those of you who are brave enough to pop open the back of your cell phone or laptop and risk voiding your manufacturer's warranty, I'm sure you've seen some electronics that look something like this. But if you want to take a closer look and look inside some of these complex circuitry, you need a tool like the APS. So let's jump in and write the X-rays from the APS into this circuitry. So this is actual data that was taken at the APS of an integrated circuit. And the views are slicing through the different layers. You can see the metallic interconnects between the different components. And imaging a chip or an integrated circuit to this level of detail generates a lot of data. So the latest chips can have tens of billions or hundreds of billions of transistors on them. For context, there are 100 billion stars in our Milky Way, right? I find it incredible that you can hold something in your hand, something that has more components than there are stars in the Milky Way. And so again, having even a large team of people process and analyze data is impossible. But with AI, we can analyze this data as it's being taken and can automatically spot and flag regions that require further study. Right? Imagine I told you there was a single blade of broken grass on a football field. Do you think you'd be able to find it? And imagine 100 football fields or 1,000 football fields. AI can analyze and flag regions that are anonymous, help and make sure that the scientists don't miss it. And this could let us build understanding these artifacts in the data that we measure, could in turn help make electronics or other parts that we manufacture more reliable in the future. That I'll send that to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthew. So now I'd like to turn to you, Casey, to hear a bit about robotics. So we've been talking about AI as if it's some sort of mind without a body, but actually some of the most interesting applications involve the combination of these large language models with robotic systems that perform experiments on our behalf. So can you tell us a bit about what we're doing there? Thank you.
Sure thing. All right, so we've heard from our previous speakers that we can now use AI to make predictions in many domains of science faster than ever before. And that will especially be true when Argonne's new supercomputer, Aurora, comes online. But what we're finding when we're applying AI to these physical sciences like biology or chemistry is that oftentimes the speed at which we can make those predictions is much faster than the speed at which we can test them in a lab. And so at Argonne, we're working to solve this challenge, and we're working to keep up with the large-scale experimental needs that we'll need in the future. To do this, we're pairing AI with robotic experimentation in a circular feedback loop that allows them to influence each other and allows us to speed up science on two fronts. This pairing of artificial intelligence and robotic labs is what we refer to as autonomous discovery. So a scientist could direct AI to train on a large data set that's relevant to their hypothesis. The AI could then learn patterns in that data and use them to predict the first set of experiments to conduct that is most likely to result in a success. The experimental instructions could then be sent to a robotic lab where they could be completed faster than ever before. And then the data from that robotic lab could then be passed back to the AI, which could update the models and learn from that previous experiment to then choose the next set of experiments. And that cycle could continue until we either reach a desired result or something happens like we run out of supplies on our system. But in order to enable this sort of autonomous discovery, we found that we need to be able to set up these robotic labs, which is no easy task. So to address this, Argonne has organized a group of scientists and engineers into what we call the Rapid Prototyping Laboratory, or RPL for short, which serves as Argonne's robotics and automation hub for all of our autonomous discovery projects. The RPL is a lab that I work in, and that I'll be talking about a little more now. So on the video on the screen, you can see a video of my colleagues and I working in the RPL. You can tell that this is more of a makerspace than a traditional lab, but that's because we're more focused on the writing of the software. We write the software in the lab that gets the robots working together, and then we deploy those instruments and the software into actual labs where scientists can complete their experiments. But in working to develop the software, we noticed some challenges with automating science. So normally when you think about automation, you think about a well-coordinated assembly line like something used for manufacturing, like of cars, for example. But the reason they're so good at automating in those situations is because they're using automation to speed up a known set of tasks and production steps. So they're trying to mass produce something that has already been discovered or created. But we at Argonne are taking a little bit of a different approach, where we're trying to automate the process of discovery itself, which is not a defined set of steps. So this means that our robotic labs need to be flexible, and we need to be able to swap instruments in and out like Legos if the needs of our experiment change. To do that, we're taking a modular approach to robotics and instrument integration, which means that the code for each of our instruments is largely self-contained, and that's what allows us to swap them in and out because the code is not tangled together. Additionally, on the video, if you can see, each instrument is located on its own cart. This is because we're experimenting with the idea of hardware modularity as well as software modularity. So not only is the code for each instrument self-contained, but each of those carts contains everything that that instrument would need to function correctly. So computers, sensors, all of it. And that's what allows us to physically unhook the instrument, roll it away, and roll another one into its place. But you don't need to use this hardware modularity in order to use our code. So the beauty of having a space like the RPL is that we're more of a prototyping space, which means we can try out different solutions to a problem and only deploy them into the labs when we know they'll work. We often use things like 3D printers, which you can see on the screen, to fabricate the parts we'll need to get instruments working together. So you can imagine that we might 3D print a different gripper for a robotic arm that would allow us to pick up small vials instead of larger labware. We're also a research laboratory, so we're constantly thinking about what improvements we might need to add to our software so that we could enable larger scale, more coordinated experiments that run across several hundred or even several thousands of instruments. We're trying to research if that's even possible in the first place, and if so, what sorts of skills might we need to develop in the workforce in order to enable this in the future. The last thing I want to mention about our software is that everything we do is open source and available to GitHub for anyone who's interested. This allows us to enable autonomous discovery and automated experimentation for groups such as universities who might not be able to afford more expensive proprietary solutions for robotic integration. Speaking of students, another main goal of the RPL is workforce development. So we need a large number of people to make systems like this work, everyone from computer scientists to electrical engineers to networking experts and domain scientists. And it's often really difficult to find these people, let alone people that can work on multiple areas of the system at once. So this kind of cross-cutting expertise is what we're going to need to enable this kind of experimentation in the future. And since we're doing science in a new way, we're going to need to train people in a new way. So to enable this, we've been working a lot with Argonne's educational outreach programs to give talks to students and to host a large number of student internships each summer. I think one year we had 15 students at once. Okay, so I've just covered a lot about how we're developing the software, but now I want to talk about a real-world example. So I also have a background in biology, so I help oversee this automated discovery platform in the biosciences division. You can't really see, but there's a lot of the same instruments in that automated lab that there was in the video you just saw, but they're all oriented in a antibiotic resistant, or in a containment unit, sorry. The reason we put them in this containment unit is to protect scientists because this automated discovery lab is focused on the development of new treatments to combat antibiotic resistance in bacteria. At the pace we're going with traditional experimentation methods, it takes about 10 years to develop a new antibiotic, but only 4 years for widespread resistance to that antibiotic to develop. So if we continue at that pace, we'll soon be left without effective treatments for these dangerous and often deadly bacterial strains. So what we do in our lab is we're looking at the development of antimicrobial peptides as a possible solution to this problem. And we're using autonomous discovery to aid us in the design of these peptides. So much like the circular loop I described earlier, we have AI that is trained on a large amount of data about the structures of existing antimicrobial peptides. The AI can then recognize those patterns in the peptides that might contribute to their effective antimicrobial nature. The AI can then suggest possible novel peptide designs that would be similarly effective but target a different bacterial strain for which we don't have a treatment. Once the AI designs the peptides, they're synthesized and then they're transferred to our platform on the screen where they're tested to see if they present that antimicrobial activity. That data is then fed back to the model, and the next set of peptides to try are synthesized and sent to the system. And that cycle then continues until we've determined if we're able to make an antibiotic for that specific bacteria. So I can talk a lot about this application because I work very closely with this robotic lab, but this is not the only example of autonomous discovery that uses robotic experimentation at Argonne. So there are several other groups working at Argonne to apply autonomous discovery to the problems of things like longer-lasting batteries, or developing circular economies to reduce waste through plastic recycling, and many more that tackle some of our greatest scientific challenges. And I'm thrilled to be part of such a large and unified effort across Argonne that has such potential to change the way we think about science.
Thank you. Thanks, Casey, and thank you to the other two speakers. You can see why working at Argonne is such a fun thing to do, because such wonderful people. So we're going to open things up to questions from both attendees and the live audience. I guess you're a dead audience. No, the live audience, the online audience, and the local audience. But I'm going to take sort of the prerogative of being the chair here and pose a few additional questions of my own before we get started. So one thing, first one, we've heard a lot about, as you might expect from us, the positive impacts AI is going to have on scientific research. But as we continue to advance in our understanding and hopefully increase the power of these AI methods, we certainly need to do that in a ethically correct manner. So maybe, let's see, maybe Arvind, you could talk briefly, what ethical considerations should scientists keep in mind when they are developing and using these powerful AI methods?
Sure. I think one of the most important things to do is to develop this in an open and transparent fashion, which means that people have ease of access to these tools. Anyone, for example, should be able to access the tools that we are developing and have the ability to run the programs that we claim as running, of course, with sort of guardrails built into them. And this is actually a main thing about building it in the open science community, which is that we want to have these toolkits as broadly as possible, available as broadly as possible, so that we can build in these controlled sandboxes where people can experiment safely, people can play with them, people can understand and provide inputs for how we want to develop them further. And I think, for example, in the case where you saw the positive application of vaccine development and so on, and developing treatments for rare diseases, there should be a realization that these tools are actually there to do more, more advantageous than actually bringing harm. It's not going to doom the entire world. And of course, there has to be this cautious approach towards understanding what the limitations are, what the frameworks build to us in terms of how we are developing these tools. So I think from Argonne's point of view, or at least the community point of view, there has been a lot of collaboration that's been inbuilt to what we are doing. Everything that we have done so far is also in the open. All the models that we have developed as part of the large language models that I spoke to you about are completely available. People can play with them. And when we spoke to people about releasing the models for viruses and so on, there is this natural tendency to hold back. And that aspect has always been something that we'll have to understand as to what these implications look like into the future, so that we can better understand how to use these tools for betterment of society rather than causing any harm. So.
All right, thank you. So now a question for you, Casey. So I observed in the video this robot wandering around in the lab that made me a little bit nervous, perhaps. So I was wondering, does robotics, do you think it can enhance the safety of laboratory work?
Yes, I do. So when we think about the lab, there's often situations that we don't, or conditions that we don't think humans should be exposed to. You can think of radiation or harmful chemicals. And in those situations, robotics and autonomous discovery would allow us to separate the human and keep them safe while continuing to perform the science. And additionally, if you think about a situation like another pandemic, you could allow the scientists to safely work from home while the robotics continues to run their experiments. We're always thinking about how to keep everyone safe, especially when robots are working with humans in the lab, which is something we do a lot, especially in the prototyping lab. But we're working with a lot of different groups around Argonne, especially safety groups, to bake those safety procedures into our process at the very beginning.
All right, thank you, Casey. Okay, well, I've got one more question, then we'll move to you. So I hope you're getting some questions in your minds. So Matthew, can you just close off by talking about how we proceed when we're doing machine learning to make sure that our models don't incorporate biases?
Yeah, I think that's a particularly pertinent question right now. As you've probably seen in the news, there have been several instances of biases entering AI models from the data that it is trained on, and this is an ongoing concern. So we do not work with people-related data, but similar concerns exist with AI models in the physical sciences. And one way to mitigate this risk is to build what we call physics-aware AI. And so what this means is that we incorporate known physical laws into the structure of the AI and to its training process. And we've found that this sort of physics-aware AI is more accurate and generalizes better. That means it's better at making predictions even when faced with unexpected or strange data. And another thing I just recalled, more importantly, because AI built this way is, aware of the fundamental physical laws, it can correct for data that's biased, say from a faulty measurement device.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks to all three of you. So now we're going to turn our attention to questions submitted by you. We've got a few that you're allowed to enter questions when you registered. So we've got a few queued up, but I hope you've got some more to come in a minute. But let's see. I think we're going to put questions up on the screens, or maybe I'm going to read them. I'll read them. Okay. So here's the first question, which I'll direct to Arvind. The participant asks, in what ways can AI technologies, such as language models, enhance accessibility and inclusivity in scientific research and in education?
Sure. I think that's a great question to begin with. I mean, these tools that we are talking about are making things that were not really accessible to the broader community in a way that's like kind of exciting now. So for example, if you wanted to do the sort of experiments that Casey was talking about, this would require at least several years of training inside a lab to understand what the processes are and how do you do that and so on. And the ability of machine learning programs to kind of generate their own code so that they can experiment or write programs that constitute these experiments is kind of exciting, because now even labs that don't have the capabilities to like sort of think of these experiments can run these experiments remotely, or even have the facility to talk to people that can run these experiments remotely in such a way that you can characterize these materials or characterize the designs that you are interested in. And that sort of democratizes the access points for a lot of people. There are also ways in which it is increasing the capacity of what people can do. Like citizen science is actually a thing, and I do believe in it. And I think having inputs from so many different groups of people, when they can try the experiments themselves and have a voice in that, can actually improve the scientific process also. And I think making that possible wouldn't have been done if AI were not enter the foray right now. So,
well, yeah. So as someone who in my undergraduate chemistry labs always managed to drop things and blow things up, I can see the advantage of being able to automate these steps. So let's see. And there's a second question that was submitted, Matthew. For you, what challenges do you anticipate in the ongoing development and adoption of AI in science? And how do you see how might we address these challenges in a collaborative manner?
So, yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges. I think a couple that come to mind is the ability to evaluate models accurately. So, quantifiably being able to tell when an AI model is good or bad is challenging. And this is true for several reasons. The training and prediction process are often probabilistic, and these machine learning models often overfit to data, which means that it learns the training data so well, like the pictures of cats and dogs that Ian showed, that it can perform poorly on new data that's different.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So the next question seems a bit more of a softball, maybe, but it's what are you most excited about, and what are the implications of your work long-term for science? So Arvind, first of all, tell us, what are you excited about?
A couple of things. I think the ability to do larger scale scientific problems, the ability to tackle larger scale scientific problems, the ability to collaborate. Using this term collaborate more deliberately, it's like collaborating with robots and humans in terms of the ability to understand very complex data and complex phenomena within our lifetime. And I think just elevating the process of human creativity. Today, I think if you just think of the amount of data that Matthew showed in his picture of the microprocessor, it's already amounting to the size of galaxies. Can we go beyond galaxies? Can we start traveling about other things? And I think that's a real possibility that can be enabled by AI. New things that we probably haven't thought about, new aspects and new ideas that still hopefully respect what we know about the physical world. And having the ability to understand these things in the context of where we are situated today. And finding cures for diseases that are normally not possible, starting from really genetic variation scale all the way to human population scale, I think really excites me.
Okay, great. And Casey, tell us what excites you.
So
AI.
I really like working with robotics. So I'm excited that we're enabling other groups to automate their workflows with our code. And I'm also excited on a larger scale that we're kind of at the very beginning of this effort that has such potential to change the way we think about science. And I'm excited to contribute to that effort.
Good, thank you. Yeah. So Matthew, you get another harder question maybe. And then it's going to be your turn for those in the room and elsewhere. So some people are scared of AI. So why should they be excited instead?
So I think I'm very excited by all the technological and scientific advances that AI has the potential to provide. Casey and Arvind talked about some of the bio applications. AI can help us in the faster development of drugs and treatments. Casey talked about experimental automation. AI can significantly accelerate what we call the material design, testing, and production cycle. And I talked about how AI can sift through astronomical amounts of data to provide key insight or identify features or phenomena of interest. If you put all this together, I think AI has a potential to accelerate scientific discovery and technological advancement, so that the next 100 years we see technological progress even faster than what we saw in the last 100 years. So, yeah,
okay, that's good. Yeah, thank you. So we're now going to take questions from the audience. So for those in person, there are two choices. We've got one mic stand. Please come to the microphone. If you prefer to remain in your seat, raise your hand, and we've got someone with a mic who will come to you. And if you're online, please type your question into the chat, and we will pose it on your behalf for the panelists. We'll get to as many questions as we can. So take it away.
This is a question for Dr. Cherukara about the physics-aware AI. I mean, I've been thinking about it. You start off with a training set and some random weights in the neural network, and you've got to update them somehow, and the training drives the update process. How the heck do you plug the physics into that? Where do you put the model in? It's like you throw a lot of random data at it and hope for the best. And once you get the answers back, how do you know if they're consistent with a model?
It's a great question. And this is an active area of research, and there's many ways of doing it. The network architecture that Ian showed, in that case, it's a purely data-driven kind of network architecture. You update all of those weights, and it tells you whether it's a cat or a dog. When we build these physics-aware AI networks, we explicitly encode physical relations into that architecture. So it doesn't just have to be those little weights of weights and biases that Ian talked about. It can be complex expressions. So you can put a differential equation into the cost function of a neural network, and have it obey that as well when predicting the data. You can put that and more complex, and all sorts of other physical operators that you can think of. If you do signal processing, you can think of a Fourier transform, for example. We encode that into the network architecture. Hope that answers the question. Okay, good.
I think we have a question
We have
online.
a couple questions in the chat. There's an interesting discussion between Walter and Courtney about the use of the term AI to refer to enhanced computational methods and data processing or advanced computing machines. Since it's not artificial and it's computation or processing, not intelligence, there's a question about the term. Courtney asked a follow-up question that I'll slide in here as well. About nomenclature and the fact that precise and consistent naming in science has always been a challenge, especially in a field that's rapidly advancing and across different groups. So do you think that will be an obstacle to significant advancement and development, or merely intensify existing bias and miscommunication? So questions about the use of the term AI.
Would anyone like to take that, or do you want me to? I mean, I'll say a few words, and then Arvind might have something. So I sort of mentioned the origins of the term at the beginning, because I think it is interesting that people have been thinking about this at least from the 1950s onwards, and probably much before that. And the initial definition is very vague or broad. You know, it's any behavior that you would think would require human intelligence to undertake. And arguably over the years, as people have mastered one thing or another, one task after another, people have said, well, that's not really AI. You know, okay, a computer can play checkers. Well, I thought that needed human intelligence, but it doesn't, and so on and so forth. So I don't think the discussion of what is AI and what is not is that useful, perhaps, ultimately. I do see there is a tendency at the moment, because AI is so popular, to label any use of a computer as AI, and that's not really helpful either. So in a sense, we might say we know AI when we see it. And for us scientists, it's methods that allow us to undertake the most fundamental aspects of scientific research, which is generating hypotheses, detecting patterns in data, designing experiments. And those are the things that interest us. But Arvind, you might have some more to say.
I agree with you. I think that is actually one of the, I think as the discourse proceeds in this area, we'll start seeing more evolution of what constitutes AI and what is real intelligence versus what is general intelligence versus artificial general intelligence, and all these terms, which I think are jargon prone. I don't think we need them for what we are trying to do. I think if you just focus on the fact that we are interested in actually being able to understand physical phenomena, and whether that understanding comes from physical equations or phenomenology that can be explained. For example, biology is a phenomenological science that we can explain using the physical laws as grounding, then I think we are in a much better space. So we can think of intelligence much later on.
I mean, one term you may have seen in the news is artificial general intelligence. So this is a high-level term that people throw around to say a computer that can do anything that a human can do and more. And the people argue about whether we have such things as ChatGPT and AGI, artificial general intelligence. Well, I would say certainly not, as if you try using it, you'll quickly see it is very limited in what it can do. So, I think it's more interesting to focus in on how do these tools help us to solve complex problems, not solve them for us typically, but help us solve them more effectively. And they'll be very good at some things and not so good at other things. Anyway, next.
I was messing around with ChatGPT a couple weeks ago, and I had read that it didn't know that 2023, the number 2023, is not a prime number. You would ask it. I asked it, is 2023 a prime number? And it would say, yes, 2023 is a prime number. And then I asked it, what is 17 times 119? And it would say 2023. And I'd go, okay, is 2023 a prime number? And it'd say, yes, it's a prime number. So with it's a tendency, that AI model anyway, to do creative math like that. how would you stop it from doing that in physics or
Yes.
chemistry lab?
Yeah, so obviously, we've all had, I've had examples of that too, and it's wonderful at some things, and then very odd at, very bad at things that you don't
The
expect.
thing that got me, it would
Yeah.
double down on its lies.
Yes, double down,
you know,
yeah.
Scary.
Sounds like a child who you ask her something and say, no, I'm sure that this is a... So obviously what that points at is we use these techniques in science very carefully. Clearly. So usually we'll be using them in the context where you can check things. So, for example, you might asking it for a prime number between this range and this range. It can give you a number. So that's a fairly intensive, labor-intensive process to find one. But once you've got one, you can check it very quickly. So we often use these AIs to suggest things that we then check using other means.
So trust but verify then.
Yeah, trust but verify, exactly. And the challenge is when it's not so easy to verify, and that's where one has to be particularly careful. Is there another question online?
Yes, our next question is from Istifa. If you could shed some light on the advancement of solar panels and global warming with AI advancements.
Yeah, is that a question for you, Matthew, or?
Take a stab at it. I'm not sure I fully understand the question. Is that...
Yeah, I'll repeat it. Can you shed some light on the advancement of AI towards solar panels and global warming? I think AI's impact on the advancements in solar panels.
Got it. Yeah, so I think we could treat it through the lens of materials discovery in general. Solar panels are one example, but this could be any class of materials where you want to constantly improve. And what AI lets us do is explore a very, very high-dimensional, very large space very quickly. Right? So if you think about the number of combinations that you can get with even a few elements, right? And think about how many elements are in the periodic table, and then how many ways you can, even with the same set of elements, arrange them in different structures. And there's this huge combinatorial explosion of the materials that are possible or can be built. And evaluating all of that by conventional methods is impossible. And so AI gives us an opportunity, plugged in with supercomputing resources and advanced modeling tools, to quickly sieve through vast spaces of these materials and identify excellent candidates for the next generation of solar cell materials.
Right, so the current challenge is to find materials other than scarce materials like, I guess, lithium is used in
batteries. Yeah.
There are scarce materials that are very hard for the US to obtain. They're plentiful in other countries, perhaps like China. Can we find new ways of making solar cells using other elements? And AI is one technique that people are applying to that purpose.
Hi. So I was really particularly interested in how Matthew was talking about how AI can process huge amounts of data in real time, and how Casey was talking about how we can use robotics to keep humans away from these new diseases, find out how to make new antibiotics, et cetera. Do you think that science is getting to a point where because there was also the comment, I'm not sure, I can't remember who made it, that very few people can visualize things the way that the AI can and computers can. So do you think that the next steps of science and medicine are going to be reliant on the fact that this technology can process things more quickly and more efficiently in real time than many humans can? I mean, there are very smart people in the world, but not everybody can do that, right?
Oh, great question. Yeah, who would like to take that?
Do you want to go first? Or do you want...
I can try. So I think kind of what I talked about with the autonomous discovery is that there are certain challenges that we're working to solve that are just they're too big to take on through traditional methods. We're just not fast enough. And kind of as Matthew was saying, there's just so many possible things that you could test. And so in order to solve those, we are kind of going to be dependent on the ability to kind of search through all the data that we do have quickly, and then decide more intelligently what we can test from there. And sometimes running those experiments does produce large amounts of data that a human couldn't sift through, in the quick enough amount of time. So,
Yeah, and I think you used this word pattern. I think humans are very good at seeing patterns in pictures, 2 dimensions. In a 3-dimensional space, we can see patterns, but when it gets up to 4, 10, 100, we can't do it. But computers can help reduce them down to problems that we are able to, patterns that we're able to see and understand.
And I think it's going to be a bit of a collaboration between humans and AI. AI will let you search these huge spaces very effectively, but then the humans will, I think, still design that search space and cast the problem for the AI to search.
Thank you very much.
Okay, great. John asks, several AI experts, including Jeff Hinton, tend to put general purpose AI to within a couple of decades. The timeline for negative effects from climate change is typically by 2050 or after. Should we not be more concerned about AI than climate change, given the timelines? And if you disagree on the timeline...
Wow, great question, yeah. I bet we all want to speak to that, but who wants to do it first? I mean, I think I'm familiar with Jeffrey Hinton's comments, and he's a very distinguished and smart fellow, so we should take him, we certainly shouldn't dismiss what he has to say. I know one of the people who coined the term AI back in 1956, I think, was quoted as saying a few years later that it's only in 2 years we'll have something that is smarter than a human, and it's now 60 years after that, and we're not there. So I think that we understand so little about what intelligence really is that it's very difficult for us to. I think humans tend to be overly optimistic about their predictions about these sorts of things. So myself, I'm not too worried. I do think it will be exciting if we get powerful computers that are as powerful and smart as us in terms of our ability to find solutions to the certainly major concern of climate change, new materials, new energy sources, more efficient ways of using the energy we have. We're working as hard as we can on those problems, but we need smarter AIs to help us to solve those problems. Anyone else want to? No? Maybe we'll move to the next question. Thank you very much.
So peer review and reproducibility are obviously key parts of scientific research and discovery. How does that work in fields like this where you're dependent on having the fastest supercomputer in the world that other people don't have access to?
It's a very good question. So, and actually something that we have to address from the beginning when we started doing a lot of these large language models. How do you allow others to actually develop on things that you're building? And a big portion of this goes back to how we wanted to reflect on the scientific process itself, which is to ensure that others are able to review and everything. So if you look at the models that we built for genomics, everything was in the open. And there were other groups in the world that basically started building on top of it and said, okay, how good or how bad we were in terms of the process. So the peer review actually is something very much part of the community itself, and depends on how open you are to that sort of criticism, right? And I think at Argonne, there is always this aspect of being open about what we are doing. And thankfully, the community has actually embraced that quite a bit, at least in our space. And a lot of the models that are coming out recently on what we have built for nucleotides or genomic scale data is being validated outside, even in applications that we did not even envisage, like we did not even think about. And so that's actually a good news for us because it means that the models are quite robust. We at least haven't done anything we didn't expect to learn, so it was good. But at the same time, we are also constantly in touch with the community to kind of feel as to what applications might benefit from this. So in the case of making the tool sets available, I think we can provide them, especially the larger scale models, and have them apply on various sorts of applications, which I think downstream it's possible for us to do. And there is on the other end, to allow other groups to actually train these models at the sort of scale that we are talking about. We are building resources that can help people get access to smaller bits of the model. So there's something called as quantization and things like that help you compress the model sizes significantly so that you can still train on a single GPU or a couple of GPU nodes, which I think is very much under the axis of general scientists. So yeah, that's a great question, but it's also being addressed in terms of like making sure that all these models are out there for people to use.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Roger asks a similar question. Please discuss replication of experiment issues. So
the question was, I think, please address replication of experiment issues. Okay, who would like to speak to that?
Do we mean with robotics? I can talk about it from that side.
yeah.
So kind of the beauty of automating an experiment is that, you have all the code that you wrote that gets those instruments to do those actions. And what you can do in those cases is that in addition to publishing your data, you can also publish that code that you wrote to get the instruments running. And you can also publish things like, all the log files, which have like information about the system and what was happening. So that ideally, that would be more reproducible than a human in some cases. Especially, and that's gonna, especially be true when we start scaling up. We need to know a lot of information about these systems, and we need to make sure that we could replicate, any experiment on different pieces of equipment, even within the same lab.
Okay, well, thank you. Next.
The second I saw that automated discovery, my brain was on fire. I mean, it really is a very cool idea. And I've been trying to connect it to AI. And this is, I guess, just more of a curiosity question, because it sounds like you guys are fairly early on in this. Do you think you might be using AI to integrate with human teams so that you can be more abstract about how you want your experiment to go? Because it might be difficult to be like, I want a pipette machine to do X, Y, and Z. Yeah, I mean, I want to hear more about it, I guess, so.
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two ways that we're looking at incorporating AI into it. You can kind of imagine an experiment where maybe you want to optimize, like there's 3 things that you can tweak in your experiment, like heat, just different things. And so you could pull in AI just search the space and find the correct combination of those things and then pass that into the robotic system. But what we're also experimenting with is the idea of having the AI design the set of steps that go into the experiment. With that, you can do things like optimize the experiment. Like if I want to run a certain experiment in this fast, how might I best do that? Or you can have it design different things about the experiment. And also there's an effort, which I'm sure one of them could talk about more, but to use AI to design the hypothesis for the experiment. So everything from creating the question to running the experiment to getting the data back and cycling that way.
I think the question is really interesting. So, as we've said, AI, artificial intelligence, is the word of the day, but some, and I think myself, would say what we really are interested in is intelligent augmentation or amplification, and that the ways that we've just heard are ways in which, as you suggested, these AI methods can help the scientist move faster or move to better places. So that's very interesting, I think.
Very cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Asha asks, can you please explain your views on how AI will replace most of the software jobs, mainly in data engineering fields? And is that a problem? How good is that?
Who wants to speak to how AI? The question is, how will it replace software engineering jobs?
I don't think that will happen, honestly. I think, if at all, what is going to happen is we are going to have people that have their skills enhanced by these tools that can help them address some of these very fundamental aspects about things that we do in data engineering or data munging and things like that, which are somewhat mundane, and helps basically expand on their skills much faster than what is possible today, right? So I would always think of it as let's say, able assistant, right? I'm giving a lot of credence to able here, but it's just an assistant that can act as ways to enhance the capabilities of what a data engineer might do or a data scientist might do. It's not going to replace the amount of creativity that you need to have for writing code or for making the sort of software jobs, I don't think they're going to vanish away anytime soon.
OpenAI was released November 30th, 2022. I think it was 3.0. They had started with a 2, a 2.5, 3.0. There's been 3.5, there's been 4.0, there's 4.0 Turbo. There is, Sam Altman said there's going to be a 5.0 before the end of the year. The gentleman was talking about, does it do computational very well? Well, there's a plethora of other large language models out there, Claude being one of them. There's Mistral, which I was using last night, that's very fast out of France. There's tens of thousands of these coming. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. And for all this to work, you have to have consistency over time. If these models are changing every 4 months at this point, do you have AI governance in the program at Argonne?
Does someone want to speak to that, or I'll say, so there's multiple answers to that question. So we're, as we indicated, our focus is on models that will be able to help with scientific problems. They're not designed to be released to the public as a whole. At the same time, we're also engaged in discussions, at the national level about how the powerful computers at Argonne can be used to assist with AI governance by testing models as soon as they come out against various criteria. So in that one sense, what do you do with someone with a powerful computer? You need someone else with a more powerful computer to keep watch on them. So I think that's part of our could be part of our role going forward.
Tom asks, language AIs have sometimes generated gibberish in writing essays, which are easy to recognize. Is that a problem in science applications?
Yes, I think so. I mean, that's something that we have to basically safeguard against. And there is a lot of work that's ongoing in that area of building trustworthiness into the sort of science predictions that are coming out of these models. Recent papers, at least in the climate world and things like that, have examined the sort of perturbations and sort of effects of doing these sort of predictions on these models, using these models. And I think much needs to be learned from the community as such. Much needs to be gotten in terms of making these models openly available so that we can do a lot more research in terms of addressing some of these concerns. So yeah, definitely at the, this is at the top of the list of priorities that we are developing as we go along. So.
One interesting observation, which I think we're becoming aware of, is how does science communicate? Well, it does it in various ways, but one important way is by people writing papers, because English is still a very good way of communicating complex ideas, and then other people reviewing them to see if they're correct, and then them being published and other people reading them. And if these generative AI methods start to be used by bad actors to generate papers and to review them, then there's a risk that bad information will come into the scientific literature. I think that's something that can be managed, but I'm sure it's going to be something we'll have to deal with more than we have had in the past. Anyway, next.
I have a question about how we are phasing away with this approach of picking the best architectures for the data that we have, and then we are phasing away from that and coming up with these synergized models. And just a year ago, we were talking about, given the data set, I'll come up with the best architecture for this problem. And then we were trying to answer this question about generalization. And now, since we are coming up with these synergized models, where, say, for instance, in biology or chemistry, infusing language models with graph models and trying to reassess how these architectures perform on different benchmarks and different data sets, I wanted to understand what is your impression of these new approaches, and does that give us a hint about how we can answer this question about generalization, because since we are training this on the entire data that is available, is that a way where scientific hypothesis and discovery is being, is this a new way, and what is your impression of it?
Yeah.
That's a very good question, very pointed question too. There are lots of answers to this, unfortunately. There's no one answer that fits this bill, and the reason for it is also dependent on how intrinsically we are representing the data. And the other side of this problem is the fact that what are the intrinsic representations that are learned by the model, right? So a graph is a natural way to express a lot of relationships. And depending on how you use the graph, semantically, meaning that if you're expressing it to understand relationships between different sets of data, you can have completely different interpretations despite the fact that the underlying data is the same. So now how do you reconcile this? Right? And that difference is the one that sort of drives you to think a lot more about the architectures and a lot more about the sort of architectures that will fit this bill of generalization. Unfortunately, we don't have good handles on whether we have a unified representation across all these data sets that we are playing with. Genomic data seems to be represented well by strings, but is that the only way to represent that? Because there is this hierarchical nature of interactions that are present. Materials has the same story. Chemistry and other subject areas also have the same story. But finding a universal representation versus the flexibility in interpretation, these are all some things that we have to deal with when we start developing these models or when we start doing these designs. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there another online question? Okay, well, actually, no. So we're running out of time, but we're not going to make you sit down about asking a question. So please, yeah.
Yeah, I was at a very fascinating open source conference called FOSDEM in Brussels a few weeks ago. And I was sort of really a non-believer till I actually saw one very effective presentation. We were saying it's a black box, we don't know what it does and all. There's a guy who just set up a very interesting experiment where he had one bot, speak, and the other bot listens, and they both kind of go at it with each other. And the human effectively is just a spectator.
Yeah.
And when you hear one bot, you can't even tell that they're bots, right? A very good text-to-speech and speech-to-text and everything, and it basically has learned a lot of human tendencies.
Yeah.
It was really fascinating to. So it's an alternate form of visualization of what's inside.
What, were they talking about football or something like that? That's what humans will be talking about in that second. Well, I don't know if there's a question there, but that's an interesting observation. It is remarkable. Every week there's something new that comes out of this in this field. So it's exciting, but also scary for us as we try and keep up. So thanks you for the wonderful questions and for being here tonight. If you have further questions that we didn't get to or that occurred to you later, you can email us at outloud@anl.gov, and we will get back to you. So then I'd like to close by thanking our three panelists for your wonderful input, and also Associate Lab Director Kirsten Laurin-Kovitz for starting things off. So thank you for joining us. We have another one of these sessions in June. I'm not actually sure what it's going to be on, but I'm sure it will be very interesting. So I hope you can join us for that as well. So have a safe trip home. Thank you.